My boss fired me to modernize operations, but ended up selling the company for pennies because nothing worked without me. My name is Theodore Blackwood and I'm 58 years old. For 22 years, I was the senior network architect at Meridian Financial Services, one of the largest investment firms on the West Coast. I built their entire digital infrastructure from the ground up, designed every security protocol, and maintained the systems that processed over $2.3 billion in daily transactions. Last month, a 34-year-old MBA named Kieran Ashworth decided I was too expensive to keep around. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the sterile conference room on the 13th floor, listening to Kieran explain why my 2 decades of expertise were suddenly worthless. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see the server room I'd designed and built, a fortress of technology that had never experienced a single security breach or major outage under my watch. "Theodore, I want to be transparent with you," Kieran said, adjusting his designer glasses and consulting his tablet. "The board has asked me to modernize our technical operations and optimize our human capital expenditure. Your salary represents a significant line item that could be better allocated across multiple junior resources." Sitting beside him was Miranda Vance from HR, a woman I'd worked with for 8 years. She couldn't meet my eyes as she slid a severance packet across the polished oak table. Her discomfort was palpable. "We can hire 3 junior network engineers for what we're paying you," Kieran continued with the confident smile of someone who'd never actually built anything. "Plus, cloud migration is the future. Your legacy systems knowledge, while valuable historically, isn't aligned with our forward-thinking technology strategy." I remained silent, studying this young man who'd been brought in 6 months ago as Chief Technology Officer. His LinkedIn profile was impressive: Stanford MBA, previous roles at 2 tech startups that had both been acquired, and a collection of buzzwords that apparently impressed the board. What he lacked was any understanding of financial systems architecture or the regulatory requirements that governed our industry. "The severance package is generous," Miranda finally spoke up. 6 months salary, full benefits continuation, and we'll provide positive references for your job search." Kieran leaned forward slightly. "I hope you understand this isn't personal, Theodore. It's purely a business decision focused on operational efficiency and cost optimization." I picked up the severance packet and flipped through it slowly. 22 years of building, securing, and maintaining systems that processed billions of dollars, reduced to a few pages of legal documents and a final paycheck calculation. "I noticed there's no mention of knowledge transfer or documentation handover," I said quietly. "The new team will handle that," Kieran replied dismissively. "We're implementing standardized cloud solutions that will eliminate the need for custom legacy system maintenance." That's when I knew he had no idea what he was doing. Our systems weren't just custom. They were intricate webs of security protocols, regulatory compliance measures, and redundancy systems that I'd built specifically for financial services. The legacy components he so casually dismissed included proprietary encryption algorithms, real-time fraud detection systems, and emergency backup protocols that had saved the company millions of dollars over the years. "Do you have any questions?" Miranda asked, her voice tentative. I stood up, straightening my tie. "No questions. When would you like me to finish up?" Kieran looked surprised. I think he'd expected pushback, maybe some pleading or negotiation. Instead, I was giving him exactly what he thought he wanted: a clean, professional exit. "End of the week would be ideal," he said. "We'll need you to transfer any critical system passwords to the new team." I nodded. "Of course. I'll prepare a transition document." What I didn't mention was that the transition document would be exactly as comprehensive as the documentation standards they'd funded over the years, which is to say minimal. I'd requested budget for proper system documentation dozens of times. The response was always the same: too expensive. We'll get to it next quarter. As I walked back to my office, I noticed several colleagues quickly looking away. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and my termination meeting hadn't exactly been secret. By the time I reached my desk, my phone was already buzzing with concerned text messages. My office overlooked the city's financial district, where I'd started my career as a junior systems administrator 3 decades ago. Back then, network security meant making sure people couldn't access files they weren't supposed to see. Now we were defending against nation-state hackers, sophisticated financial crimes, and regulatory scrutiny that could shut down operations with a single compliance violation. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning out my desk and preparing what Kieran had requested: a basic transition document that outlined system access credentials and contact information for our primary vendors. What I didn't include was the deeper knowledge, the undocumented security protocols, the custom scripts that ran automated maintenance tasks, the specific configuration settings that prevented the trading systems from conflicting with the client management databases. These weren't secrets I was intentionally withholding. They were simply the kind of institutional knowledge that accumulates over 2 decades of building and refining complex systems. The kind of knowledge that can't be captured in a PowerPoint presentation or learned from a cloud certification course. On Thursday, I met with the 3 junior engineers Kieran had hired to replace me. They were bright kids, recent computer science graduates from good schools, full of enthusiasm about modern development practices and cloud-native solutions. They asked intelligent questions about our network topology and seemed eager to learn. "Mr. Blackwood," said the team lead, an earnest young man named David Chin, "we've been reviewing the system architecture diagrams. Some of the security implementations seem unconventional." I smiled. Unconventional how? Well, the multi-factor authentication system appears to be integrated directly into the trading platform rather than using a third-party service. And the backup protocols involve physical servers in multiple locations rather than cloud storage. "That's correct," I said. "Financial regulations require specific data sovereignty and security measures. Cloud services, while convenient, don't always meet the regulatory requirements for handling sensitive financial data." David nodded thoughtfully. "Kieran mentioned we'd be migrating everything to AWS within the next few months." I kept my expression neutral. "That will be an interesting project. Make sure you thoroughly understand the compliance requirements before making any changes." What I didn't tell them was that the unconventional security measures had prevented 3 major security breaches in the past 5 years. Or that the physical backup systems had saved the company $12 million during a regional internet outage that lasted 4 days. Or that the integrated authentication system was the only reason we'd passed our last regulatory audit without fines. Friday was my last day. I arrived early, completed my final system checks, and prepared to hand over access to my replacement team. At 3 p.m. I was called to HR for my exit interview. Miranda seemed genuinely sorry to see me go. "Theodore, you've been such a valuable part of this organization. Is there anything we could have done differently?" I considered her question carefully. "You could have valued experience over cost savings. You could have invested in proper documentation and knowledge transfer systems. You could have recognized that some expertise can't be easily replaced." She made notes on her tablet. "I'll include that feedback in my report." At 5 p.m. sharp, I gathered my personal belongings, a few family photos, my coffee mug, and a small cactus that had survived on my desk for 8 years, and walked to the elevator. The security guard at the front desk, a man I'd chatted with every morning for the past decade, nodded sympathetically as I turned in my access badge. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Blackwood," he said. I drove home to my house in the Berkeley Hills, where my wife Elena was waiting with a glass of wine and a concerned expression. "How do you feel?" she asked as we sat on our deck overlooking San Francisco Bay. "Honestly? Relieved," I said. I've been carrying the weight of those systems for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to not be responsible for everything. Elena, who'd spent 30 years as a high school principal before retiring, understood institutional knowledge better than most people. "What happens now?" I shrugged. "Something will turn up. It always does." What I didn't expect was how quickly something would arrive. The first call came on Monday morning at 7:30 a.m. I was in my home office, updating my LinkedIn profile when my phone rang. Kieran Ashworth's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. "Theodore, it's Kieran. We're having some minor issues with the authentication system. Could you give us a quick call back? Nothing urgent, just want to clarify a few configuration settings." I deleted the message and went back to my resume. 3 more calls came throughout the day, each voicemail sounding slightly more stressed than the last. By Tuesday, the calls were coming from Miranda and HR. "Theodore, I hope you're doing well. The technical team has some questions about the backup protocols. Could you spare an hour for a consulting call? We'd be happy to compensate you for your time." I was curious enough to pick up the phone. "What's the issue?" "Well, there seems to be some confusion about the disaster recovery procedures. The new team can't locate some of the backup systems." I wasn't surprised. The backup systems were distributed across 3 physical locations, with access protocols that changed based on the type of emergency and the systems affected. It had taken me years to design a system that could handle everything from localized power outages to major earthquakes while maintaining regulatory compliance. "I'd be happy to consult," I said. "My rate is $500 per hour, minimum 4-hour engagement." There was a pause. Let me discuss that with Kieran and get back to you. She never called back. Wednesday brought a different kind of call. This one was from Harrison Caldwell, the founder and CEO of Meridian Financial. I'd worked directly with Harrison for nearly 2 decades, and he'd always treated me with respect. His voice was tense. Theodore, I need to ask you something confidentially. Did you leave any kind of time-delayed issues in our systems? I was insulted but not surprised by the question. Harrison, in 22 years, have I ever given you reason to doubt my professionalism? No, of course not. I'm sorry for asking. It's just, we're experiencing some unusual technical difficulties and Kieran suggested that I sabotage the systems on my way out? Harrison sighed. The board is asking difficult questions. Our trading platform went down for 6 hours yesterday. We've never had an outage that long. I felt a mixture of vindication and genuine concern. Despite my frustration with the company's decision, I didn't want to see Meridian fail. Too many good people worked there, and their clients didn't deserve to suffer because of Kieran's arrogance. Harrison, I left detailed transition documentation. Everything I did was professional and by the book. If your systems are failing, it's because the new team doesn't understand how they work. Would you consider coming in as a consultant? Just to help stabilize things. I thought about it for a moment. I appreciate the offer, but I've committed to exploring other opportunities. Have you considered that maybe the legacy systems Kieran wanted to replace were actually mission critical? After I hung up, I sat in my garden thinking about the conversation. Part of me felt guilty for not helping, but a larger part recognized that this was exactly what needed to happen. Sometimes organizations only learn the value of expertise after they've lost it. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Lawrence Steinberg, the CTO of Pinnacle Asset Management, Meridian's largest competitor. Lawrence and I had known each other professionally for years, often running into each other at industry conferences and regulatory meetings. Theodore, the email read, I heard about your departure from Meridian. I've always respected your work, and I wondered if you might be interested in discussing opportunities with us. We're looking to upgrade our entire network infrastructure, and we need someone with deep financial systems experience. Would you be available for coffee this week? I replied immediately and set up a meeting for Friday. Thursday brought chaos to Meridian Financial. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from former colleagues, each one painting a picture of escalating technical disasters. David Chin, the junior engineer who'd been asking thoughtful questions during my transition, sent me a carefully worded text. Mr. Blackwood, I hope you're well. The team could really use your guidance. Are you available for any consulting work? I called him back. What's happening, David? It's bad, he said quietly. The authentication system is rejecting valid user credentials randomly. The backup system's activated yesterday, but we can't figure out how to restore from them. And Kieran is talking about implementing the AWS migration immediately to solve the legacy issues. I felt a chill. David, whatever you do, don't let them migrate production systems to the cloud until they understand the current architecture. You could lose everything. I've tried to explain that, but Kieran says the old systems are fundamentally broken and need to be replaced entirely. The systems aren't broken. They're complex. There's a difference. That evening, Elena found me in my office, staring at my computer screen. You're worried about them, aren't you? I nodded. 22 years of work is disappearing because someone decided that experience was too expensive. Maybe this is your chance to build something better somewhere else. She was right. The next morning, I drove to San Francisco to meet with Lawrence Steinberg. Pinnacle Asset Management occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district. Lawrence met me in the lobby, a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. We'd always gotten along well at industry events, bonding over the unique challenges of securing financial networks. Theodore, he said, shaking my hand warmly, thank you for coming. I have to admit, I was shocked to hear about Meridian's decision. In our business, institutional knowledge like yours is irreplaceable. We took the elevator to his office on the 23rd floor. The view was spectacular, but what caught my attention was the wall of servers visible through a glass partition. Clearly older equipment, probably 5 or 6 years old. I'll be direct, Lawrence said as we settled into comfortable chairs near the windows. Our infrastructure is aging and we've been putting off a major upgrade for too long. We need someone who understands both the technical and regulatory sides of financial systems. Someone who can design something that will last. He gestured toward the server room. What you're looking at represents about $3 million in hardware that's becoming more expensive to maintain every year. But we've been hesitant to upgrade because we've seen too many firms experience major disruptions during migrations. I studied the equipment through the glass. What's your current capacity and growth projection? We're processing about $800 million daily right now, growing at roughly 15% annually. We expect to hit $1.5 billion within 3 years. Regulatory requirements? Full SEC compliance, SOX auditing, PCI DSS for payment processing. Plus we're looking at expanding into European markets, so we'll need GDPR compliance within the next 2 years. Lawrence leaned forward. I'm not looking for someone to implement off-the-shelf solutions. I want someone who can design a custom infrastructure that gives us competitive advantages. Someone who thinks long-term. I felt a spark of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about maintaining existing systems or fighting for budget approvals. This was about building something new from the ground up with proper planning and adequate resources. What's the timeline? I asked. Flexible. We'd rather do it right than do it fast. I'm thinking 18 to 24 months for full implementation, with staged rollouts to minimize risk. Budget. Lawrence smiled. Whatever it takes. We've seen what happens when firms cut corners on infrastructure. We'd rather invest properly upfront than pay for emergency fixes later. I thought about Kieran's cost-cutting mentality and his confidence that cloud solutions could replace custom financial systems. I'm interested. What would you need from me? Complete system architecture design, security protocol development, regulatory compliance planning, and team leadership during implementation. You'd be Senior Director of Infrastructure Architecture, reporting directly to me. The title was better than what I'd had at Meridian, and the scope of work was exactly what I'd always wanted to do but had never been given the resources to accomplish properly. I have one requirement, I said. Complete documentation of everything we build. No shortcuts, no deferred documentation, no institutional knowledge that exists only in someone's head. Lawrence laughed. Agreed. That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to hire you. Your reputation for thorough documentation is well known in the industry. We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical requirements, team structure, and implementation strategies. By the time I left Pinnacle's offices, I had a job offer that was 30% higher than my Meridian salary, plus equity options and a $50,000 signing bonus. As I drove home across the Bay Bridge, my phone rang. Kieran Ashworth again. This time I answered. Theodore. Thank God you picked up. We have an emergency situation here. The entire network went down this morning and we can't get it back online. We need you to come in immediately. I pulled over to the side of the road. What happened? The new team was implementing some security updates and something went wrong. We've lost access to all client accounts, trading is suspended, and the SEC is asking questions about our system stability. Have you tried the emergency restoration protocols? That's the problem, we can't figure out how to access them. The documentation doesn't include the specific steps for this type of failure. Of course it didn't. Emergency protocols were complex, with different procedures depending on the type and scope of the failure. The documentation I'd left behind covered basic operations, not crisis management. Kieran, I'm not employed by Meridian anymore. You'll need to work with your team or bring in external consultants. We'll pay you $1,000 per hour. Whatever you want. I thought about the offer from Pinnacle, about Lawrence's vision of building something better, about the respect and resources I'd be given to do the job properly. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I've accepted a position elsewhere. There was a long pause. Theodore, please. The company is losing millions of dollars every hour we're down. Client trust is being destroyed. People's jobs are at risk. Then you should have thought about that before you decided my experience was too expensive. I hung up and called Lawrence Steinberg. I accept your offer. The next 6 months at Pinnacle Asset Management were the most productive and satisfying of my career. Lawrence had assembled a team of experienced professionals who understood that building financial infrastructure required patience, expertise, and attention to detail. My first hire was David Chin, the young engineer from Meridian who'd been asking intelligent questions during my final week. He called me 3 weeks after I started at Pinnacle, sounding exhausted and frustrated. Mr. Blackwood, I hate to ask, but are you hiring? The situation at Meridian is getting worse, and I'm worried about my professional reputation if I stay. I brought David in for an interview and was impressed by how much he'd learned during the crisis at Meridian. More importantly, he developed a deep appreciation for the complexity of financial systems and the importance of proper documentation. I've seen what happens when institutional knowledge walks out the door, he told me during our meeting. I don't ever want to be in that position again. David became my lead systems engineer, and together we began designing Pinnacle's new infrastructure. We started with a comprehensive analysis of current systems, regulatory requirements, and growth projections. Every decision was documented, every component was tested thoroughly, and every team member was trained on multiple aspects of the system. Meanwhile, Meridian Financial was struggling. Industry publications were reporting on their technical difficulties, and several major clients had moved their accounts to competitors. The SEC had launched an investigation into their system stability, and their stock price had dropped 23% since my termination. I tried not to take satisfaction in their struggles, but it was difficult to ignore the vindication. The legacy systems Kieran had dismissed were exactly the kind of robust, carefully designed infrastructure that Pinnacle was asking me to build. 3 months into my new role, I received a call from Harrison Caldwell. His voice was strained, and he sounded like he'd aged years in the months since I'd left. Theodore, I owe you an apology. The board has asked me to reach out and see if there's any possibility of you returning to Meridian. We've realized that letting you go was a serious mistake. I was working late in my new office at Pinnacle, reviewing security protocols for our European expansion. Through my window, I could see the lights of Meridian's building across the financial district. What happened to Kieran? I asked. He was reassigned. We brought in an emergency consulting firm to stabilize our systems, but they're charging us $50,000 per week, and progress has been slow. I see. Theodore, we're prepared to offer you a significant package to return. Your old position plus a promotion to VP of Technology Infrastructure, 50% salary increase, and a guarantee that you'll have final authority over all technical decisions. It was a generous offer, and 6 months ago it would have represented everything I'd wanted from Meridian. But I'd moved beyond that now. Harrison, I appreciate the offer, but I'm committed to Pinnacle. We're building something special here. Is there anything we could offer that would change your mind? I thought about the question seriously. Honestly, no. You had 22 years to value my expertise properly. You chose short-term cost savings over long-term stability. I'm not interested in cleaning up that mess. After I hung up, I felt a profound sense of closure. The vindication was complete, but more importantly, I was building something better than anything I could have accomplished at Meridian. 6 months later, Lawrence called me into his office with a satisfied smile. Theodore, I have some interesting news. Meridian Financial is for sale. He handed me a copy of the Wall Street Journal, with a front-page article about Meridian's financial difficulties. The article mentioned ongoing technical infrastructure challenges and regulatory compliance issues as major factors in the company's declining valuation. They're asking $180 million, Lawrence continued. 2 years ago, they would have been valued at over $400 million. I read through the article, noting mentions of client defections, system outages, and regulatory fines. The journalist had done his homework. Every technical problem mentioned in the article was a direct result of the infrastructure failures that began after my departure. Are we interested? I asked. Lawrence's smile widened. The board authorized me to make an offer. $120 million, contingent on a complete technology infrastructure assessment. The irony was perfect. Pinnacle would acquire Meridian for less than a third of its previous value, primarily because they destroyed the very systems that had made them valuable. Who would lead the technical assessment? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You, of course. Who else understands their systems well enough to evaluate what can be salvaged? 2 months later, I found myself walking through Meridian's offices for the first time since my termination. The acquisition had been completed, and I was leading a team of Pinnacle engineers in assessing which systems could be integrated and which needed to be completely rebuilt. The building felt strange and familiar at the same time. Many of the faces were new. Meridian had lost nearly 40% of their technical staff during their crisis period. But some old colleagues remained, and their reactions to seeing me ranged from embarrassment to relief. Miranda Vance, still in HR, greeted me awkwardly near the elevators. Theodore, it's good to see you again. I want you to know that many of us disagreed with the decision to let you go. I nodded politely. How are things? Better now that the systems are stable again. The consulting firm finally got everything working, but it took them 8 months and cost us nearly $2 million. In the server room I designed and built, I found David Chin training 2 new engineers on the restored systems. He'd stayed at Meridian through the crisis and had been promoted to senior systems administrator. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his face lighting up. "I can't believe you're back." "Just temporarily," I said. "We're evaluating the systems for integration with Pinnacle's infrastructure." David's expression turned serious. "Will there be positions available at Pinnacle for the Meridian technical team?" "For the right people, yes. We value experience and institutional knowledge." By the end of the assessment, we determined that most of Meridian's systems would need to be rebuilt using Pinnacle's architecture. The infrastructure I'd originally designed was sound, but the modifications and fixes implemented during the crisis had introduced instabilities that made integration impractical. However, we'd also identified several valuable assets: a talented core of technical staff who'd learned hard lessons about the importance of proper system design, client relationships that could be restored with stable technology, and regulatory permissions that would accelerate Pinnacle's expansion plans. The integration took another 6 months, during which I spent considerable time at the Meridian offices, working with their remaining staff to transition operations to Pinnacle's systems. It was surreal to be back in my old environment, but now with the authority and resources to implement the changes I'd always known were necessary. One afternoon, as I was reviewing migration schedules, Harrison Caldwell stopped by my temporary office. He looked older and more tired than I remembered, but there was a dignity in his bearing that I'd always respected. "Theodore, I wanted to thank you personally for how you've handled this transition. You could have been vindictive, but you've been nothing but professional." I looked up from my laptop. "Harrison, I never wanted Meridian to fail. I just wanted my expertise to be valued properly." He sat down across from my desk. For what it's worth, the board learned a valuable lesson. Experience and institutional knowledge can't be replaced by cost-cutting and good intentions. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Retire, finally. This whole experience taught me that I should have stepped back years ago and let someone younger run things. I just wish I'd chosen better successors." After Harrison left, I stood at the window of my old office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. In 18 months, I'd gone from being considered an expensive liability to being the architect of a system that would manage over $3 billion in assets across 2 companies. The vindication was complete, but more satisfying was the knowledge that I'd built something lasting. The new integrated infrastructure would serve both companies for decades, with proper documentation, trained staff, and systems designed for reliability rather than cost-cutting. 1 year after the integration was complete, Lawrence Steinberg called me into his office for our quarterly review. Pinnacle Asset Management had become one of the most technologically advanced financial firms on the West Coast, with systems that regularly received recognition from industry analysts and regulatory authorities. "Theodore, the board has approved the European expansion. We'll need to build out infrastructure in London and Frankfurt. Are you ready for another challenge?" I smiled, thinking about the long-term architecture we'd need for international operations, the regulatory complexities we'd have to navigate, and the team we'd need to hire and train. "Absolutely. When do we start?" As I walked home that evening across the Bay Bridge, I reflected on the journey from Kieran Ashworth's termination meeting to my current role as Senior Director of Global Infrastructure at one of the industry's most respected firms. The vindication had been satisfying, but the real reward was the opportunity to build systems the right way, with proper resources and genuine appreciation for expertise. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your former employer, it's about proving your worth so completely that everyone recognizes what they lost. Kieran Ashworth had given me the push I needed to move beyond the limitations of a cost-cutting culture and into an environment where experience was valued over expense. I never did find out what happened to Kieran after his reassignment. But I did know that the systems I built at Pinnacle would outlast any executive's tenure, serving clients and supporting careers for decades to come. That seemed like the most fitting legacy of all. The last time I heard from anyone at the old Meridian, it was David Chin calling to tell me he'd been promoted to Director of Systems Engineering at the integrated company. He'd learned the lessons that only come from watching institutional knowledge walk out the door, and he was committed to building systems and teams that would never make the same mistake again. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, "I wanted to thank you for showing me what it means to build something that lasts. And for teaching me that experience isn't expensive, it's invaluable." As I hung up the phone, I realized that was the most satisfying vindication of all. Not just proving my own worth, but ensuring that the next generation of engineers understood the difference between cutting costs and creating value. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, but once learned, they create wisdom that no amount of money can buy. That's the kind of legacy worth building, and the kind of revenge that doesn't destroy anyone, but instead creates something better for everyone. If you enjoyed this story of professional vindication and strategic success, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Revenge Galore for more stories where experience triumphs over short-sighted cost-cutting, and where the best revenge is simply proving your worth elsewhere.